before we begin talking about the afterlife, I want to talk about the use of the very word afterlife. We use it a lot, I think, especially in today's culture. In fact, there was a movie that came out just a year ago with Matt Damon about the afterlife. It was called Hereafter. But I wonder what it says about us as a culture that we call what happens beyond this world the afterlife. And I wonder if it is because sometimes we see heaven as the epilogue to what's really real, which is this life. Because the afterlife, that word kind of conjures up images of Greek mythology, Hades, the underworld, maybe even the Elysian fields. But it's not exactly an understanding of Christian heaven. Sometimes in our empirical society, where what is judged as real is the things that we can taste and touch and hold and measure, we can grow accustomed to an understanding that the spiritual is not really real. Or if the spiritual or mystical is real, then it's real only by analogy to what we can experience through our senses. And so I think for that reason, sometimes the spiritual in general, heaven, is seen as real, but only in a shadowy kind of way, as this life is real. But I want to argue that heaven is not so much the epilogue to this life, as this life is really the prelude to the fullness of life, which is heaven. So I generally don't like to begin talks by criticizing the title of the talk, but so we're going to talk this evening a little bit about heaven and hell and judgment, and who's in heaven and who's in hell. We'll try not to send too many people to hell this evening. But first of all, I want to talk about the theme of judgment. This is something that I'm going to address just briefly, and then as we go on throughout this talk, I'm going to mention other aspects of judgment. But in general, the Catholic Church teaches that there are two kinds of judgment. The first is the judgment that happens immediately at death, which is called particular judgment, or individual judgment. It's the judgment of the soul at the moment of death, based upon whether or not that soul, that person, is open to God, fundamentally open to God's grace. Or, if that soul, on the contrary, is not open fundamentally to God's grace and mercy, that is, that soul is in a state of mortal sin, a state of being in which the person has closed himself or herself off to God, to God's being, to God's life, to God's grace. Those who die in such a state, the Church teaches, immediately at death are judged and experience eternal hell. And those who die in a state of openness to God, to God's grace, to God's mercy, experience immediately what we call the beatific vision, which I'll get into later on. That's the particular judgment. Then there's also the general judgment, or the final judgment, the last judgment. The last judgment happens at the end of time. And it's a judgment that is concurrent with the resurrection of the bodies, the resurrection of all the dead, the resurrection of those who are destined for heaven, the resurrection of those who are destined to hell. It's a kind of corporate judgment. Those images of the Lord Jesus as judge, placing the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. And that's the general judgment, the final judgment. So these are the two kind of perceptions of judgment. Now, the difficulty in talking about all this is that we think as human beings in space and time. Time is the measurement of the movement of matter, material reality. This is how we think, this is how we define words and concepts, this is how we talk about things. And so when we talk about a realm in which there is time, it's very difficult to talk about before and after and how long, what it's like, and so forth and so on. This is a theme that we're going to find throughout this discussion. The limited nature of our ability to talk about things that are eternal. Simply because we don't live in eternity, we live in time and space. And so inherently our language is limited and finite and unable to pierce and penetrate and encapsulate the fullness of the reality that we're discussing tonight. So all the words that we use and all the concepts and formulations that we speak about are only approaches to what is truly real. Let's talk about heaven. We'll talk about heaven, and then we'll talk about what my grandmother used to call the bad place down under. Which is from Australia. Very xenophobic woman, so. First of all, I just want to invite you to think about maybe the images that you have in your head and your mind about heaven. Some of us, of course, I mean, the thing that sometimes we think about is the clouds and the angels and the harps and the playing. It sounds like a terribly dreadful and boring place. Some people imagine, the Hallelujah chorus going on and on and on and on. The song that never ends. Others think, and this is actually a question my mother asks me all the time. She said, Michael, what's heaven like? She wants to know about her dad. She's convinced, of course, that her dad, and I'm convinced too, actually, that my grandfather is in heaven. But she wonders what that must be like. He was an avid golfer, and she kind of maybe envisions him playing golf on this really, really nice golf course. We think about that sometimes. We talk about, so-and-so, whatever so-and-so is passionate about. They're in that big, whatever it is, fill in the blank, in the sky, right? We can kind of think about heaven that way too. All of these ways and approaches of thinking about heaven, of course, are absolutely inherently wrong. But they're understandably wrong, again, because of that idea of as human beings, our finitude, our temporality, our inability to express ourselves the way we want to, our inability to talk about what is truly real. And so we conjure up these images. I think one thing that we have to do before we talk about what heaven is we have to talk about what heaven is not. And we have to kind of clear the brush away, the cobwebs away that are distorting our images of heaven and hell. That, of course, takes a much longer time than we have tonight. But I want to say, first of all, that heaven is not some sort of disembodied reality in which we are always listening to terrible, boring organ music, or angels on clouds with harps, or a magnification of a nice earthly experience, but just on a higher level of magnitude. Heaven is the perfect union with God. But that says absolutely nothing. It's true, but it says absolutely nothing. Because we first have to ask the question, who is God? In the same kind of difficulties that we've been talking about earlier, namely our inability to really discuss and name the eternal God, plays into this discussion about heaven. Because if heaven is the perfect union with God, but if we can't really talk about God, then it's a fact we can't talk about heaven. Right? We can't talk about heaven because we can't talk about the state of being in which we're in union with this being that we know nothing about. We do know some things about God, but again, because our language is so limited, because our concepts are so limited, because God is in a completely different order than we are, a completely different order of being than you and I are. And that is to say that you and I have much, much more in common with a microbe than we do with God. That said, however, we can turn to Revelation, in which God reveals himself to us. We can turn to the human ability to make certain not affirmations, but negations. That God, for instance, is not a body, but he's a spirit. And we can also turn to our experiences in this life of perfections that we experience, attributes that we experience. For instance, goodness, or beauty, or truth, or power. God is the infinite maximum of every perfection that we can possibly imagine. Again, whether it's goodness or beauty, or truth, or wisdom, or power. But on a completely different level. But nevertheless, because God created the world, there's a certain correspondence between what we experience here and who God is. And because of that correspondence, we can say certain things that are true about God. So, for instance, we experience goodness here on earth. We experience goodness in other people. We experience truth. We experience truth in mathematics. We experience truth in different elements of the sciences that we investigate. We experience power in different ways. And that all can be applied to God. But we have to be careful about how we apply it to God. Because again, God exists in this absolutely different, we can call it dimension. It's not really the right word, but it'll work for now. That's not my alarm. I said my alarms won't go on too long. That's someone who wants to talk to me clearly. About heaven. He wants to talk about heaven. He's a priest. He's following me right now from New York. So what we can say about God defies, what we can say about God is true and positive, but who God is defies all of our categories. He defies all of our concepts, really. And there are moments, though, that we experience in this life, like, they completely kind of blow our mind to one degree or another. And I think in particular about music that moves us. I think about art, which really makes an extraordinary impression with us. I think about the beauty of marital sex that really defies words or conceptualizations. And I think also, and I would add, about prayer, especially those who experience contemplative prayer deeply, mystical prayer, ecstatic prayer. These are all moments within the human experience here on earth that defy linguistic ability to define. And for that reason, we often have to describe these things in non-traditional ways, like poetry, in ways in which we talk about these category-defying experiences. And God is, in a sense, similar to that, in that we can experience Him even here and now, but the way in which we experience Him can never be really encapsulated into words. But that is to say that our words only approach the reality of who God is. Our words only begin to express the shadow of the glory of God. Broadly speaking, heaven is the direct and immediate and eternal experience of God. It's direct in that, and immediate in that there's no kind of barrier between us and God, as there is now. We experience God, as we just said, now through material reality. Because in this life, in this world, we have no other way of experiencing anything, really. So it's through matter that we come to know things. That's why, by the way, the Catholic Church has such a reverence for what we call the sacramental, broadly speaking, the seven sacraments, but also the sacramental vision of reality, in that something can come to mean something more than it is. It can become a conduit, a channel of grace, a conduit or channel of knowledge and wisdom and power and grace of God. But the beatific vision, as we call it, is this immediate vision of God. And it's eternal, that it takes place outside of time, outside of space. And the beatific vision is a transforming vision. In other words, we are transformed and changed by what we behold and contemplate.